right, so welcome everyone to Making the Familiar Strange. This is just a chance for us to study Abrahamic scriptures, though we've kind of moved beyond that a little bit in the last few things, and that's great. But it's really just to encourage new perspective taking and looking at familiar things and from new points of view. As always, our ground rules are to be as respectful as possible, to challenge your own assumptions, speak from your own point of view, and be open to new perspectives. And just a few announcements. This Thursday, the 21st at 11:30, we're having our monthly Coffee on the Commons. So you're always welcome to join us for that here at the Tri-Faith Center. We'll have coffee and some cookies and just a chance very casually to meet people here that are involved at Tri-Faith. And it's come and go for about an hour. So again, very casual and low barrier of entry. So we hope you can make it. Next month on October 17th at noon for Making the Familiar Strange, we'll have Bintu Tall, who's one of our board members, and she's a member at AMI. And she hasn't yet decided on her topic yet, but she was leaning towards Muhammad's wife, Khadija. So I'm hoping that she'll do that. But she'll be joining us next month. And then we're hoping on Tuesday, I think it's October 24th. Yep. From 5:30 to 7:30 to have a clergy meet and greet. So an opportunity for people to come again to the Tri-Faith Center. We'll have some refreshments and just an opportunity to meet the clergy, especially Rabbi Sharf, who is new at Temple Israel. And I think that's all I have. So I will turn it over to you, Sandra. Sandra Squires, I'll do a little introduction. Sandra Squires, she's a member at St. Augustine of Canterbury Episcopal Church, which happens to be my church. And she's going to be sharing on Lectio Divina today, which is a kind of meditative way of studying scripture. And so, Sandra, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. It's nice to be here. One of the things I'd like to do, first of all, is just have everybody share their name and your denominational affiliation or religion as you choose. And I'm going to call on the name simply because of the fact that your order is probably not the same as my order. Okay, so I'm Sandra Squires. I'm an Episcopalian. I'm not a cradle Episcopalian, which is a term we use. I was raised in the Missouri Synod Lutheran tradition, which is pretty fundamentalist. So I love the Episcopal tradition, and I'm happy to be with you today. I'm from Omaha. Laura?
Hi, Laura French. I'm a member of Temple Israel. And I also had a fairly long quest before I found out there was a name for what I believed. And so I've been Jewish for about 15 years, I think. I live in Stella, Nebraska. I'll answer your questions about that in the comments.
Nan?
Muted here. Hi, my name is Nan Smutko. I am Episcopalian and I live in Blair, Nebraska. And I'm not a cradle Episcopalian either. When my husband and I got married, we decided that the Episcopal Church is where we wanted to go. So I'm looking forward to this conversation very much.
Yeah. David Newberry? David is not responding. So
yeah,
Dory?
Oh,
you're here. Okay.
I just had to figure out the technology.
Okay.
Okay, so we're doing intros. Okay. I see my camera's not working. I'll have to fix that too. Okay, so I am a polyglot or something like that. I started out Methodist. I went off to the Episcopalian church. I've done Presbyterian. I've been agnostic. I've been Muslim, and now I'm coming back to Christadelphia.
Okay. All right. That is a journey. Dory? You're on mute.
And I'm muted, and I'm not one to normally do that. Yes, I'm Dory. I go to Temple Israel, and I'm, as you put it, not cradled Jew. I was raised in a very fundamental evangelical Baptist church, and I have very soft warm spot in my heart for Episcopalians because they helped me on my journey to find where I belonged and where I ended up in Reformed Judaism and Jews. Thank you to all Episcopalians.
Peter?
Good afternoon. I grew up in the Christian Reformed Church. This is a small Dutch denomination. We attend now Episcopalian Church in America congregation in Omaha.
Okay.
Nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet you. Laura Lee, and you have a companion.
Yes, I actually go by Lee. I am Laura Lee, but nobody gets that right. So I go by Lee, and I was born a Protestant Christian, but I didn't do much with that. And later in my life, in my late 40s, I converted very happily to Judaism. And now I'm even working in a Jewish library here. And that's the story. I live in Omaha.
Thank you. And would your friend like to introduce herself?
I'm Ducky Milder. People know me as Ducky, not Lois, but I'll answer to anything. Anyway, I grew up in Sioux City, Iowa, and we belong to the conservative temple synagogue. But I was very thrilled to become a Reform Jew, and belonging to Temple Israel has been really a joy in my life.
Thank you. Mariah?
Hi, I'm originally from California and relocated to Omaha in the past year. I was raised in the evangelical tradition, but have been exploring Reform Judaism for the past 2 years.
Thank you. And Taylor?
Hi, I am Taylor Gustafson. I work at Brownell Talbot, which was founded with the Episcopalian Church. We have chapel once a week with an Episcopalian father. So I just want to learn more about how we can make that more welcoming to all students. My children currently go to Catholic school. I was raised Lutheran, and I would just say that I'm really open to all spirituality. I enjoy taking pieces from everyone and just kind of seeing how that fits with my own journey.
Thank you. And Carrie? You're on mute.
Okay, hi, I'm Carrie Pillen, and I'm a cradle Catholic and still officially a member of the parish I grew up in Bellevue, St. Mary's Bellevue. My husband and I have not been back to church since COVID, and I would be pushing harder to do that if I didn't have so many difficulties with the church. You can see on my clinic jacket, maybe, I try to make sure I keep some of my LGBTQ colors around all the time. I have a kid who's trans and another kid who's private about their sexuality. And it's really difficult to be a Catholic these days. It's really difficult to be in Nebraska under my husband's first cousin, also a Catholic who allegedly loves all peoples, jurisdiction. So, but anyway, I like many things from many faiths, and I'm always happy to participate in multi-faith projects.
Thank you. Barbara?
Hello, my name is Barbara Venman, and I'm in Melbourne, Florida. And I was raised Lutheran. I'm a member of a progressive Lutheran church right now, but I'm also a co-founder of an interfaith organization in our county, which includes about 30 different faith centers. And my current practice is focused more on spirituality than it is on any particular denomination. And it's been a joy in my own faith journey to worship with a number of different faith centers and followers. And I've found God in every one of their houses of worship.
Thank you. Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie. I am a cradle Episcopalian, and I am in Kearney.
Oh. Hamza?
I'm Hamza Aki. I'm an active Tri-Faith member here in Omaha. I've actually done Make the Familiar Strange a few years back. I'm an active member at AMI, and I am excited to be a sponge and learn so much about all the wonderful things that everyone's going to talk about. So being Muslim, we're really not taught all the denominations, but I did go to Baylor University, which is Christian, and then I studied at SMU, which is Methodist, and got to experience a little bit of that. So faith-based education and healing and interfaith dialogue are things that I champion.
Thank you. Jean? Jean?
Hi, I'm on my cell phone and I don't know how long I'm going to be able to do this, but I think I didn't hear the question, but I think it was background and how you found this group. I grew up Methodist, Protestant, kind of fell away from it during high school and college years. I'm well into my senior years now, and I discovered Tri-Faith Initiative during COVID. That was one of the blessings of COVID. And I've enjoyed, I'm researching, I call myself a seeker. I'm really drawn to Reform Judaism, and I've been enjoying learning about it and other religions through the Tri-Faith group.
Thank you. And Megan, do you want to add anything to your little bio?
Sure. I am Megan Griffiths. I'm Mission Advancement Coordinator here at Tri-Faith, and I was raised in the United Methodist Church, but married into the Episcopal Church. My husband is a priest, and so now I am a member and raising a cradle, I hope a cradle Episcopalian.
Well, thank you all very much. I just want to share with you that my background with doing Lectio Divina is primarily working with youth. I came to this study when I was youth coordinator for the diocese of the Episcopal Diocese of Nebraska, and used this for years with teenagers. And then when I grew up and I started working with adults and found out I called it African Bible study because I learned it from something that Verna Dozier, who is this very significant woman in the Episcopal Church. She was a Christian educator and was also a teacher in the public schools. And she taught it to us when she came to Nebraska one time. And I thought, whoa, this will work with kids. And it did. So that's how I got my start. So my start is a little different than the real contemplative approach. And I'm going to share a little bit about both. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation. Bear with me. And so Lectio Divina, and you do pronounce it as an X. I learned that from one of my priest friends, that it's not Lectio, Sandra, it's Lectio. So Lectio Divina is a method of prayer, is what it really comes down to. And I just love this. I found this quote of C.S. Lewis, and I thought it was so fun. And I thought, this is a great way to start. Well, let's now, at any rate, come clean. Prayer is irksome. An excuse to omit it is never unwelcome. When it's over, it casts a feeling of relief and holiday over the rest of the day. We are reluctant to begin. We are delighted to finish while we are at prayer, but not while we are reading a novel or solving a crossword puzzle. Any trifle is enough to distract us. And we know that we are not alone in this. And I've just found that really kind of a humorous way of being honest about prayer. This is not an easy thing for us to become prayerful people. So what is this? And basically, Lectio Divina is, it's called divine reading. And it is an ancient practice. I'm sure that it's probably been around long before it was ever named. And the practice was listening for the voice of God that comes through scriptures. And the thing that happens with Lectio Divina and any variation thereof is there are multiple readings of the sacred text, often in different translations. And it's not something where the experts are going to tell us what it means, but rather the emphasis is on what the text says to you as a person. And that is a very important distinction between typical Bible study, if you would, whatever kind of scripture study, and Lectio Divina. So there's no right answer. And that's why I think it works so well with kids, because they didn't have to come up with something that was the right answer, because any answer that they shared was the right answer. So it's a cycle. You read, you meditate, you pray, and then you contemplate. And the contemplation part of it often involves some kind of exercise like writing or journaling. So I'm just going to run through these quickly, because I hope to have a little more in depth, maybe even practice this. So it's called divine reading or sacred reading, and it's meant to be heart-centered prayer. So this practice is hearing scripture and trying to truly kind of dive into that scripture and figure out what it's saying to you. And as they say, we read out loud, then we reflect on a word or a phrase that speaks to us from that reading. So it might be one word, and we are going to practice this. Then you're going to listen to it read again, as I said, sometimes in a different translation. And it doesn't have to be scripture, it can be sacred readings. So sometimes hymn texts or poetry. Of course, much of the Bible is poetry. Excuse me. And then when we hear it the second time, we say, what does this say to me? What is this piece that I'm listening to speaking to me? You hear it again, and then you say, what is God calling me to do with what the message is from here? So a little bit of history. It has its roots in Judaism from what I've been able to find. And my information came primarily from a book that I was able to obtain on Lectio Divina. See, I'm doing it again, Lectio Divina. And it rooted in Judaism of the memorizing and learning scripture by heart. Then the Christian application became known to us from the 3rd to 5th centuries. They had what they called desert mothers and fathers. These were basically folks who went into the desert or went into some very isolated place. They contemplated the scriptures. They often did not own Bibles, so they memorized great sections of scripture. And sometimes people would come out to them for counsel, and they would ask them to give them a word. And then they would take that word back with them, and they would spend time contemplating that. Then in the Christian tradition in the 6th century, most of us have heard about Benedict of Nursia. He's the one who founded the Benedictine order. And he, for Christians, the Benedictine order is fairly well known. And in that particular way, he wrote in the idea of Lectio right into the order and their work. And then Vigo was a monk who apparently then took this and made it more scholarly, and that was in the 12th century. So as you can see, there's been a pattern here that is every few centuries it kind of crops up. And then recently this has been a practice that has been revitalized and it's quite popular right now in terms of Christian communities. And so it's also practiced in other religious traditions and I found that really interesting because I think that basically we're talking about reading, listening to the scripture, the teaching, and then meditating on it and finding what God's calling us to do. Okay, now I'm gonna break this up I'm gonna stop this for a minute because I want to talk to you about two approaches that are completely different as far as I'm concerned. They are both Lectio. One is what I have seen most recently used, and that is the idea of using this as a contemplative practice, almost like centering prayer for some. It combines elements, if you will, of centering prayer. Centering prayer is going into a very quiet meditative approach. With this, there is a stimulus, and that stimulus comes from scripture. As I said, it can be from poetry, from hymn text. It can be something that you just read and thought, well, this is great. I really want to spend some time meditating on that. So the contemplative approach is done typically, that's something you can do privately. So if you approach this and you, let's say that you're doing some kind of a scripture reading, whatever your tradition is, and you run across something, one approach is just to read until something strikes your fancy. And then you stop and you look at that piece because something in that stopped you and made you stop and think. So that's one approach to getting, if you will, to what the message is that's touching you today. Another is if you are reading, let's say that you're reading a certain book from the Bible. A lot of people use Psalms for this because the Psalms always have such strong messages to us. So Psalm is one way to go with this. You can, and I will show you an example in a minute, but this individual approach, even if you're doing it individually, it's best to read it out loud. And the reason is because once you hear it, it says something different than when you just read it. So you're going to end up, by the time you get through, if you do this and do some contemplation, you spend between 15 and maybe some people spend more time and they can stretch it out to 30 minutes. But if you've got 15 minutes, you can still do a contemplative Lectio Divina on a passage of scripture. So you would read it, you'd find your what spoke to you, whether it was from your regular reading or if it was something that you just read and said, oh, that really appeals to me. You're going to stop, you're going to look at that. Hopefully you'll look at just a few verses. Too much, and some people advocate for much longer, but I think you can get a lot out of just 3 to 4 verses, maybe 6 at the most, but you want it to be small. So you're going to listen to what this says. As you read it, then you're going to look and say, okay, what word, one word, or what phrase stood out to me? And then you just, if you're doing this individually, you just write that down and say, okay, and then you think about it. What was it that was so powerful to me in this passage that one word was what spoke to me? So then you, as I say, you spend a little time just thinking about that. Then you read it out loud again. And I'm doing this this is individual practice here. So you read it out loud again. And when you read it out loud again, you are listening to what's it saying to me? And as you were listening to yourself read it or someone else read it, what's the message here? What is this saying to me? What is God speaking to me, saying to me? And so this is kind of an interpretive step. And so you sit for a minute with that and think about that. Maybe write a few things down that it speaks to you. And then the last part of it is reading it again. And then with this reading again, what is God calling me to do about this? Is there something in this message that I should be doing? Something that it's telling me to do. And then it's possible, depending on your inclinations during the contemplative part of this, for you to respond by writing a prayer, by writing something, by journaling. And Lectio Divina is not meant to be the same interpretation every day. Let's say 2 years down the road, you end up with the same passage that you just did today. And you're going to be in a different place. You may not even come up with the same word. First of all, you may not even remember you did that passage, but you may not come up with the same word or phrase. Something is going to vary about that experience almost each time you go through it. So now I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully it's on the, okay. So this is kind of what I just reviewed. So this is the contemplative approach. And you can do this in a group. The first time I ever did it in a group, I kept waiting for people to talk. But you can do this very sweet and tender contemplative approach as a group. So just kind of go through this again. You're going to select the passage, and then you're going to get yourself, if you will, in the mood for whatever you are sharing and going to study here. So this one author, I loved her words. She said the next part was the settling and shimmering phase. And during this, she advocated reading the passage twice. And then, as I mentioned before, listen for that word or phrase that shimmers for you. And then the next one was to go to the, in this case, the third reading. She had you read it twice. Now this one, the savoring and stirring, you're going to read it a third time. And then you're going to tell the other people in a group, if you're in a group, or if you're by yourself, you're going to write it down on a piece of paper. You're not going to make any comments. You're just going to share. And then you're going to sit with that for a minute. Then you'll read it again and try to savor any images, any memories. Maybe the word that came out just struck some kind of a memory in you, and just sit with that. And as I say, this is a very contemplative approach. And then the next part, which she calls summoning and surveying, you read the passage again, and then you figure out what I mentioned before. What is God inviting you to do, or what is that? How does that connect with your life right now? And then slowing and stilling, sit with a contemplation, thank God for what it revealed, and then you can journal, or you could write a poem or prayer. So this is much more contemplative than what I've done with kids. Now, here's the more, what I call conversational approach. And I learned it to be called African Bible Study. It also is called the Lambeth Study, because during Lambeth, which is an every 10-year celebration, that clergy in the Anglican Communion come together in Lambeth from throughout the world. And at that point, the African delegation brought this form of study to Lambeth and introduced it to them. And this was back, I think it was in the 50s or 60s. So it's been around for quite a while as what's called the Lambeth Study. So let me go back to the screen again. Okay, so this conversational approach to Lectio works very well we did this for quite some time. It was before Ben and Megan were at our church, but we did this for quite some time between services and looked at the readings for the day. And so we would read all the readings for that day, and then we would select a passage from one of those readings, and we would use this. That was with adults. With kids, I would often pre-select a passage that was kind of related to something that we were talking about for our meetings. So how you come up with it is completely up to you. But you always kind of want to settle and breathe quietly, and that's easy with children and kids. I think the youngest I've ever used this with is probably about 4th or 5th grade. But mostly when I was working with youth, I was working with teenagers here. So we read the passage first, we read it out loud, and then you start with the person who is the leader, and then you share one word and you go around the circle. We sat in a circle, and you do this without comment. And then you listen to it read again. And if you have more translations of the Bible than one, then it's okay to go ahead and listen to it from another translation, because sometimes you'll pick up something that you didn't before. And so then you ask the question, where does this passage touch my life today? And then you read it and share. And the suggestion I found online was starting with, for me, the passage touched me or in my life today. And then you do the third question, from what I heard, what is God calling me to do or be or do this week? So it's really important to not make it look like it has to be a lifelong commitment, because people get a little spooked by that. It's like, oh, well, I don't know if I really want to do that for my whole life, but I might try it this week. So then you end with a reflection or just a quiet time. And then what we did is we always prayed for the person on our right. So you would try to recall the things that they had said or something about that person that you wanted to pray for. And you prayed for that person. And then we often closed with the Lord's Prayer. So that's doing it as a more conversational approach. So there are variations to Lectio Divina, and one that I like to use a lot, and my EFM group would probably tell you I use it too much, is the Visio Divina. And that is to use an image either with scripture, or you can use the image alone. So it can be a painting. I use a lot of the St. John's Bible illuminations. You can have a piece of sculpture, you can have some kind of a sacred object, and then you can combine the scripture with the reading. This image that's on the left here, this happens to be baptism of Jesus, and this is John the Baptist moving away from the river, and Jesus is back here in white. It's hard to see him there. So that's a variation. Another is Audio Divina, and that is to listen to sounds. You might listen to chants, you might listen to a song that somebody has written that has a particularly powerful message. That is another form of Lectio Divina called Audio Divina. And then you can have nature, you can have images from nature, or you can simply be in nature and have that as your experience. Sunsets are always good. Flowers, in this case, I've got some cute little birds on the post. And then sacred stories, to look at the stories of our lives. This summer I was on a pilgrimage to civil rights sites, And there were many sacred stories that were shared with us from the lives of people who lived through that civil rights experience. Okay. So texts, examples, and I'm just going to show you a few. I have a meditation, and there are a couple of meditations here. You can also look at scripture, hymn texts, texts and music, poetry, images, icons. A lot of people spend time with icons. So this is one example of a text. When your tongue is silent, you can rest in the silence of the forest. When your imagination is silent, the forest speaks to you, tells you of its unreality and the reality of God. But when your mind is silent, then the forest becomes significant. I don't know what I did there. Real and blazes transparently with the reality of God. So that was, oh, that's magnificently real. That was one contemplate. You could contemplate that. Another place I found someone was contemplating, I'm sorry, the entire Psalm 139. I would suggest that you take a piece of that and use a shorter passage. And then this was one I found from Hafiz, who is a Persian poet from 14th century. Now's the time for the world to know that every thought and action is sacred. This is the time for you to compute the impossibility that there is anything but grace. Now is the season to know that everything you do is sacred. So just to summarize, you can do Lectio Divina in individual, you can do it in a group, and these are just a review. I think we've done that enough, so I don't think I have to do that anymore. And I think I've done that enough too. So what I'd like to do, because this is going to be a little tricky since we're a group larger, typically you try to keep the groups fairly small, but what I'd like to do is choose one of these passages, read it to you, and we can put it up on the screen. Was there anything in those passages that appealed to you? I know I went through them very quickly.
I'm always happy to relate to anything with nature, so I liked the picture in the Mertens passage.
Okay, all right. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Are you okay with that one?
And the Hafiz poetry, but nature's good too.
Okay. Well, let's go find that passage. And most of these pictures I did take myself. I just want you to know I did that because then I wouldn't have to worry about, a few of them are paintings that I bought the book, so I would have the ability to make a copy of that book. I'm sorry about that. Okay. We're going to go back there. Just know that that is magnificently. So let's do this, because we've got both a visual and we have a written passage. So I'm hearing that we'd like to try this one, okay? So let's just sit with a minute. And as we sit with it, let's look at the little salamander and just think about its life. Okay. Would someone like to read the passage for us, knowing that that word is magnificently?
I can do that, Sandra.
Thank you.
When your tongue is silent, you can rest in the silence of the forest. When your imagination is silent, the forest speaks to you, tells you of its unreality and the reality of God. But when your mind is silent, then the forest becomes magnificently real, and blazes transparently with the reality of God.
So sit with that for a minute and find a word or a phrase. Or if you prefer, you can find something in the image that speaks to you. Okay, so we're going to just go around and share. And you don't make a comment, you just share the word or phrase. So I will share that mind is silent, was my phrase. Laura?
Rest in silence.
Nan?
I transparent.
David?
Tough one because my mind is never silent. So release.
What was it?
Release.
Release. Thank you. Dory? Pass. Peter?
Mine was
Oh.
soothing.
Okay. Taylor?
Just like words that popped out were still and quiet.
Harry?
Silent and silent and silent.
Barbara?
The forest speaks.
Okay. Denny?
Silence.
Megan?
The or the exact phrase, but the mind is silent.
Okay. Dory, I didn't know if you wanted to speak or if you were passing. I couldn't quite tell.
What's passing?
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to go look at it again. And is there somebody else who would like to read this for us? And this time we're going to be listening to what does this passage say to me?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
Okay, Dave. When
your tongue is silent, you can rest in the silence of the forest.
When your imagination is silent, the forest speaks to you, tells you of its unreality and the reality of God. But when your mind is silent, then the forest becomes magnificently real and blazes transparently with the reality of God.
Sit with that a minute and we'll look at it. And again, what does this passage say to you?
Is it possible to leave? Is it possible to leave the text up there the whole time?
Yeah, it is. What is it saying to you?
It says to me, maybe it's harder to listen, or maybe it's better to listen.
Thank you. Someone else?
I think for me, it kind of aligns with a lot of the spiritual work I'm doing right now, which is just that that word unreality is popping out a lot to me. Just of like really the unreality of all the things that we think we need to do and need to accomplish in the day-to-day life. And just that like what really is truly God and like truly important is just like the present moment and like the beauty of, you know, just that green color that's popping out, or the laugh of a child, or the connection that you make with a coworker or something like that.
Thank you.
For me, the significance of silence, in which something, regardless of the type of silence, there's always something that can be gained, but the fullest expression is when the mind is silent.
Someone else?
What keeps popping in my head is a scene from a TV series called Babylon 5. And it involved, it's sci-fi, so it kind of resets everything off into another time and place. But when the quote unquote older races was trying to teach a human captain different things, and one was beauty, and directed to go into the space that was very run down, and people that he encountered there they looked destitute and couldn't figure out why am I here? How's this beauty? And a brief exchange, to start it. And then the people that were there began a little Gregorian chant, and the acoustics in that space made it divine to listen to. It was just amazing because everything was just right with how the sound in the room was. And it took him being silent and to be able to hear it, to stop judging the space around him, to hear it. And I think that's something that's stuck with me, that sometimes you need that silence of your mind to hear or see the beauty around you.
Others?
I think for me, it's how much I crave silence these days. I have a young child. I'm working full-time, going to school part-time, have other social life, and parenting, and how much I need to make time for that silence and making my mind silent. I would love that right now.
Others?
David, that you're
Yes.
muted right now if you're sharing.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was mentioning that in these phrases, there's a progression. Your tongue is silent, and your imagination gets silent, and finally your mind is silent. But we have a saying or a phrase that says emptying yourself, utterly getting rid of your ego, getting rid of your desires, getting rid of everything that you think about the world, in order for all the millions, zillions of manifestations of God to come through. It's kind of like Ibn Arabi in his Sufi discussions back from, I think, 1000s. When you kill your ego, you have room for God. So that's what I kind of see in this.
Thank you. Others? I'm struck by the word blazes. There's all this silence, and then there is this burst of energy. And I see that as kind of a metaphor for what happens when I give myself the opportunity to be quiet, and then something just kind of gets in my head and it comes there. But it doesn't, I don't get that inspiration unless I am silent. And if I am, and if I can calm myself down enough to listen, then there's this burst of something wonderful that comes. That blaze that's mentioned there. Anyone else? Okay, well, we're going to go on then. And the next and last question is this passage calling you to do anything? Is it calling you to respond to God? Is it calling you to do anything? And this doesn't have to be life-shattering. This just can be one small thing. But let's read it again and think in terms of what is it calling me to do? Maybe I need to change something. Maybe I need to try something. What does this passage speak to me and suggest that I do? So do I have another reader?
I could read it.
Thank you.
When your tongue is silent, you can rest in the silence of the forest. When your imagination is silent, the forest speaks to you, tells you of its unreality and the reality of God. When your mind is silent, then the forest becomes magnificently real and blazes transparently with the reality of God.
So how does that speak to you in terms of something you might try or something you might want to change? Or is God calling you to do something through this passage?
For me, because I just read it, I just saw that the phrase "reality of God" it's in caps, so it's the first letters in capitalized. So it just kind of spoke to me a little louder to to grasp that, to accept that reality in capital letters.
Okay. Others?
I can share. I think going back to why I picked transparency, because this is a reminder to me that I need to spend time in that silence, because when I do, then I am able to look out and see the wonderful, magnificent gifts that God has given us. You know, I can sit on my patio and listen to the chickens and look at the trees. And, you know, that's what I mean by transparent. I mean, if you give yourself that time to be silent and listen and be open, the world becomes very beautiful around you. And it really refreshes me to do those kinds of visualizations, especially in the mountains.
Others?
It strikes me that this is an interesting passage to read right now when we're in the period kind of between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when we're called really to You know, we're called to tshuva, and we're called to think a lot about our past and what we need to do differently, which I think tends to make the mind kind of busy in this season in a way. But then I remembered there's a wonderful teaching by Rabbi Lawrence Kushner that says that Moses was called to be the prophet. The incident of the burning bush was what was important was that Moses watched long enough to notice that the bush was burning. And that's why Moses was chosen to be the prophet. So Moses could have walked right by and said, yeah, well, burning bush, that happens. It's the desert. Moses could have fought quickly and poured water on the bush, you know, or taken off his cloak and beat the bush, you know, but obviously it takes a while to realize, to watch a bush and realize that it's not being consumed by the fire. And so I think that maybe is a sort of an example in story of somebody whose imagination was silent. He wasn't going, oh, I've got to do something, I've got to do something. But he was just really watching and observing that. And that's how, when he paid attention that way, that's how God was able to speak to him. So for me, maybe in this season, a little less mental racket and a little more just sort of observing in silence might be useful.
Thank you. Well, our time is up, and I want to thank you for coming and participating as well in this exercise. So hopefully you'll try this. We would normally, if we were in a group, then we would pray for each other, or go around the group and pray for each other, or we would maybe say a group prayer. But that's kind of the exercise. It is not complex, but it can be very deep and meaningful. So I hope you'll try it and see what it does to speak to you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you all for joining us. And I hope you'll join us next month when Bintu joins us. And if you have a second to fill out our survey in the chat, that would be much appreciated. It will also be included when I send a recap email with the link to this as well. So that should be the next couple of days. And I hope you all have a great afternoon, and we'll see you hopefully on Thursday. Come join us for Coffee on the Commons. I'll see you then. Bye.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Sandra.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.